Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I hope this episode helps you identify and break your next growth barrier. And if you enjoy it, subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll never miss a thing. Hey, whether it's staffing, budget, volunteers, or one of the many things that hold back churches, overcoming growth barriers is the key to progress. And if you're ready to break your next barrier, the Art of Leadership Academy is for you. Inside, you'll get access to all my on-demand church leadership courses, team trainings, coaching calls, but more importantly, you'll join a network of 1,500 high-capacity church leaders. Some will be right where you're at and some a little bit ahead, but everybody in the group is committed to leading a healthier, growing church and supporting each other. So if you want to fuel your mission, not just by consuming information, but by pairing it with people who will both challenge and support you, today's the day. You can learn more and start making progress by visiting theartofleadershipacademy.com. And also, check out He Gets Us. Churches across the country are using resources from the He Gets Us campaign to give people new and creative ways to share Jesus' message of radical love. Go to hegetsuspartners.com/Carey and you can sign up to get free resources like discussion guides, prayer guides, reading plans, and more. Now to today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Hey, great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So this started with a personal story that you tell in Atomic Habits. But as I was getting ready for this, I thought, there's a lot of leaders who feel like they've been punched in the face over the last couple of years. But that literally happened to you playing baseball, hit in the face with a baseball bat. So talk about how that became the launching point for what has become your life.
Well, my sophomore year of high school, I was hit in the face with a baseball bat. It was an accident. Bat slipped out of my classmate's hands, but I was air carried to the hospital. I had multiple seizures. I couldn't breathe on my own. I ended up being placed into a medically induced coma that night. The recovery was a very long process, so I couldn't drive a car for the next 9 months. I was practicing basic motor patterns like walking in a straight line, had physical therapy. So it was kind of a long process, and I just wanted to get back to, playing baseball and being kind of a normal, high school kid. But it was the first time in my life where I was really forced to start small. Like all I could manage to do was whatever the next exercise was at physical therapy or the next, like small milestone. And so that's what I had to focus on. Now, at the time, I didn't have any real language for describing it. Like if you would have come up to me, I never would have said, "Oh, I'm just trying to get 1% better each day," or, "I'm just trying to make small improvements." Like I wouldn't have phrased it like that, but I experienced it that way. And I think, a decade later, when I started my business and started writing about these topics and exploring them in more detail, I had some of that personal experience to draw upon. And actually, a lot of the topics that I write about in Atomic Habits are things that I had to practice myself. Like I had to build a writing habit just to complete the book. I have workout habits and exercise habits and nutrition habits and relationship habits and, all kinds of stuff like that. And I think that does make the material better because I have to be a practitioner of the ideas and not just like a theorizer of them. And as best as possible, I try to only write about topics that I also utilize in real life. I think it just makes it grounds it better. The other side of that is I struggle with all the same things everybody else struggles with. Like, have I ever procrastinated on a habit? Yeah, all the time. Like, do I focus too much on the goal and not enough on the process? Yes, of course. And like, in a sense, everything I write is just a reminder to myself to come back to center and focus on the fundamentals and return to, the things that matter most. So I'm mostly writing for myself. It just happens to be that my needs are similar to a lot of other people's needs.
So you hinted at about a 10-year gap between the accident recovery and then sort of making this your life, right? With the blog and then eventually the book and speaking and everything. What happened in that intervening 10 years? Did you ever think about doing something else with your life? Did you have another plan for your life? Like, how did you stumble on this success, or how did that unfold?
Well, I never intended to be an author. So that part I kind of stumbled into. The injury happened when I was pretty young. I was 16, I was in high school. So of course the next few years I'm finishing high school and then going to college. And, I ended up playing baseball through college, and I always enjoyed school. This is something I think is a little different than a lot of my entrepreneur friends that I have who seem to be like very anti-school or feel like they were kind of a square peg in a round hole sort of thing. I liked it. It was like a game for me, and I like trying to optimize things and figure out how they work and get better at them. So I always enjoyed the process of learning. So it wasn't that I didn't care about school at all, but all I really wanted to do in college was play baseball. I wasn't really thinking too much about what the next step was. I ended up going to graduate school just to kind of buy myself some time and give myself like 2 years to try to figure out what I was going to do next once my baseball career was over. And while I was there, I was studying, or I was working in the Center for Entrepreneurship, and I saw all these people starting businesses, and I started to get like a little bit of an itch to start my own thing too. Mm-hmm. And looking back, it's easier to connect the dots. Like looking back, there are quite a few sort of entrepreneurial things that I did in my past that I just didn't know that that's what it was at the time. Okay. Like in college, I would collect everybody's textbooks at the end of the year or the end of the semester that they like didn't want. And then I'd sell them on Amazon for everybody. And then, like split the profits or whatever. Or when I was picking a major, I looked through the course catalog and, there's like 50 or 60 options and I didn't really like any of them that much. None of them were standing out to me. And then I found out that there was this process where you could design your own major and you just had to submit like your curriculum proposal to the Academic Affairs Council. And so I did that and I was like, I picked all the classes I wanted to take, which was mostly like science and sort of stuff. And then I was like, what would this be called, basically? And it was like, oh, it probably would be called biomechanics. And so that's what I called it. And they were like, yeah, sure. Like you can major in that. So looking back, that's like a fairly entrepreneurial thing to do, to be like, I don't like any of these options. I'll go ahead and create the one that I want. But I didn't know that at the time. And so when I started my career, my entrepreneurial career, I didn't have any entrepreneurs in my family. I didn't have any authors that I knew or were friends with. So a lot of the first few years were just me like getting to know people who were doing the thing that I wanted to do so that I didn't feel like I was kind of out of my mind for attempting it. So that I was kind of surrounding myself with people where my desired outcome was their like normal lifestyle. And the more that I got to know those people, the easier it became to show up and do those things each day. So that's just kind of the quick overview of that sort of arc.
Yeah, because I talk to a lot of budding, people who want to have an online platform or switch to writing or that kind of thing. How did you find those people in the early days to reach out to even begin to get a template for what you needed to do?
Well, there are like multiple levels to this I think are worth kind of unraveling. So the first is I kind of feel like the central mindset that you need to have as an entrepreneur is trusting that you'll figure it out. Like there are no playbooks for almost all of this stuff. And there's no, even if there's like a way to do it that most people do it, you're never going to feel like, oh, this is a perfect fit for my lifestyle. And so it's very easy to get into this story of, well, maybe that works for somebody else, but it wouldn't work for me. Or maybe that's, that sounds good, but I don't think it would work in reality. And it's very easy to talk yourself out of stuff, even when the world has not given you like a true hard stop. Like it's actually very rare in life to run up against a true brick wall. There's like almost always somebody else you could have reached out to, or a different small step you could take, or another line of attack. It's very rare that it's truly like, no, sorry, the universe has said no, there's nothing else you can do. It's almost always the case that there are barriers or obstacles, but people stop themselves before the world stops them. They just are like, well, I'll just stop trying at this point. So I think I did have that willingness or that trust that I would figure it out, even though I had no idea what I was doing. And so I think that mindset's important. The next thing is that I had my own kind of period of fumbling around. I didn't know that I wanted to be a blogger or a writer or an author. I just knew that I wanted to have a business. And so I tried a variety of business ideas the first like year and a half, and I was just kind of taking freelance clients on the side to pay bills. And none of them worked very well. I just ended up kind of like wasting my time and launching like these bad products that nobody would buy. And like I did an iPhone app, for example. I think it made $17. And it cost like $1,500 to get it coded. So you don't have to be very good at math to know that didn't work out well. But my point is that I was trying things, and one of the best pieces of advice I got early on was to try things until something comes easily. And so about a year and a half in, I had tried a couple different blogs and stuff at this point, and the iPhone app and some other things. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start writing at jamesclear.com and write about some of the topics I'm interested in. And so I wrote about habits and productivity and all the stuff that I write about now. But I also wrote about some other things like healthcare or how to have better squat form in the gym and, stuff like that. And whenever I wrote about habits and strategy and decision-making and productivity, whenever I wrote about those topics, the audience, like, it resonated way better. The results came much faster. And so that idea of try things until something comes easily, it doesn't mean only do easy things, or it doesn't mean that it will always feel easy. It just means that when you get it right, your hard work, the units of output that you get will be much greater for the work that you're putting in. And so, like, I was working hard the whole time, but suddenly I found something where I was getting results much faster. So that was kind of the first signal that I was like onto something. And so once I had done that kind of like self-discovery or figuring out what kind of business I wanted to run, or at least what I wanted to write about, then it became easier to reach out to people and to start to get to know people, because I was like, okay, I'm writing about nonfiction topics, peak performance, productivity, how to build better habits. Who else is already doing all that stuff successfully? And then I could just start to put together a list of other people and writers who already had books on those topics or already had websites on those topics. And then it's just having the guts to send them a cold email. And most people say no, but occasionally you'd be like, hey, you want to get on Skype and chat for 20 minutes? Like, I'm working on this project over here. And, eventually, after emailing hundreds of people, I got to know 30 or 40, and it kind of went from there.
Boy, I think young entrepreneurs should just replay that 3 or 4 times. That is so good. And a part of your story I wasn't fully familiar with, and yet it's one I hear over and over again. Just taking a few stabs, didn't work out, tried this, didn't work. Then I found something that felt natural. And I love the fact that you were reaching out after you built a little bit of credibility and had a lane to run in.
I call it the power of having a project. It's so much easier to get a cold email from somebody who's already working on something interesting. Like, if you just think about this in a very obvious way, a very straightforward way, interesting people want to know other interesting people. So the single best thing that you can do is to do something interesting, to try to create your own thing that is compelling or useful or valuable. And if you start by creating something of value, people who also have something of value just want to get to know you because they're like, oh, it's kind of cool. They're making their own thing. They're creating their own little dent in the universe. And so it's so much easier to get a yes from people when you have a project of your own that you're working on and creating. And sharing the work that you do or the value you create is kind of like the ultimate networking hack. Just like doing it and sharing it publicly will attract like-minded people. It's almost like you're creating sort of like a magnet for anybody who's interested in that kind of thing. And it just works so much better than like going to a cocktail party or trying to find a mentor in some, whatever that means. So it just works a lot better when you have a project to anchor the request to.
So you've written about this, and I think if it's accurate, my understanding of it is once you got that focus and started writing on productivity and habits on your blog, things started to take off relatively quickly. Your blog takes off, your newsletter takes off. Eventually you land a book deal within a few years, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes people have success, but they don't know what to do with that. You know what I mean? Like your platform got momentum. How did you figure out? Because it seems to me, looking back on the last decade, you have had a very strategic approach to success when it came. How did you figure that out?
Yeah, that's interesting. Probably too generous. I bet there are like people who look at me and are like, he doesn't know what to do with it. Like they probably feel like I'm still screwing it up. My general thing is I try to use my current advantages to secure new advantages. So it's just sort of an endless process of trying to accumulate or improve your position. And in the beginning, my main advantage was time. I didn't have a family. I didn't have a bunch of responsibilities, so I could put a lot of time and effort into each article. And so that's what I did, like everything I wrote, it took me 20 hours or 30 hours. Like it was just, it was a really long thing, but I made sure each one was as good as I could make it. And if I did that twice a week, that's kind of the habit that launched my career. I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday, and I did that for the first 3 years. And eventually that led to the book deal and all the other stuff. But so, first the advantage was time. So I used that to try to create the best work possible. Then the audience starts to grow. And then like maybe that becomes the advantage is the audience. And so then I try to use that to get the book deal. And then you have to make the most of that opportunity. So I spent the next couple of years trying to like create the best book possible. And then you do a great launch and then the book comes out. And then, so it's just like you try to just keep using each little stepping stone to get to the next piece. I don't really have some like super long-term thing that I'm working toward, like in the sense that I didn't start out and be like 10 years from now, I want to be an author, or 10 years from now, I want to have a best-selling book. It was more just the strategy kind of emerged as I went along. And my main focus was, am I being useful? Am I providing value? Am I helping people and trying to make some little contribution to my portion of the conversation? And if I'm doing those things, then good things are probably going to happen. And so, yeah, I think that's mostly how I thought about it, rather than like having a clearly laid out plan.
So very few books sell 100,000 copies, fewer still 1 million, but you're pushing or perhaps have passed 10 million copies of Atomic Habits. Do you have any idea what has led to that kind of crushing success? And I have no idea is a very plausible answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's like everybody's read it. It's incredible.
I have no idea. Might be maybe that's a smarter answer. That might be an honest answer, but I do have theories. I do have things that I think have helped drive it. So first, I feel like I'm just going to make these numbers up, but it's just a rule of thumb to kind of illustrate the point. 50% of the success of the book is how it's positioned. So the example I give is there's a chapter later in Atomic Habits where I talk about deliberate practice. Now, it could have been a book about deliberate practice where I talk about habits, but instead it's a book about habits where I talk about deliberate practice. And I think the difference in how those two books would sell is enormous, because just by virtue of growing up in society and being a part of life, you kind of know that having good habits is favorable and desirable, and having bad habits is unfavorable and undesirable. And I don't have to convince anybody of that. Like I am just writing a book that taps into a desire that people already have. And so my job is to convince you that this is the best way to approach it, or this is the most useful set of ideas on the topic, not that this is a topic you should care about. And there are a lot of books that are doing the opposite, that are trying to convince you this is a topic you should care about. And that's like a really uphill battle if there's not already some desire that people have. Mm-hmm. So the positioning of the book is crucial, or the positioning of a topic. The other 50% is like 1,000 details that all need to be done consecutively and need to be finely polished and, and refined. So the bulk of it is how it's positioned, but then that's not enough on its own. You also have all these other little things. I think that launching a book is kind of like launching a space shuttle or launching a rocket, in the sense that you need to put an enormous amount of energy in to get it off the launching pad and to get it up out of the atmosphere. But if you get it high enough, then it'll stay in orbit on its own. But if you don't get it high enough, then it just crashes back down to Earth. And so you need to reach escape velocity. And so the way that you execute the launch of a product, or in this case, a book, is a really important part of the process. Now, of course, I had some advantages because I had spent 5+ years building an audience. And so I had a large email list to launch to. But it's not like that just happened. Like I had to work 5 years for it to be there. So all of that energy and time that I put into building the audience ended up paying off. It was kind of like latent energy or latent potential that was just finally released when the book came out. And there were a bunch of things that we did for the launch of the book, so we can talk about that if you want. But the point is just you need to put a lot of energy in to get it out there and to get the word of mouth started. But the book has far outpaced my ability to market it. It's outpaced it. More people have bought the book than are in my audience now. So even if every single person I could reach bought it, like it still is beyond that. So how does that happen? What's going on there? And I think the only answer is that the only way, I think we can debate what the number is, but there's some number that you could drive just by building a large audience and executing a good launch. Maybe it depends on the size of your audience, of course, but maybe it's 50,000, maybe it's 100,000. It depends on the timeline too. Are we talking about over the first year, or over 5 years, or whatever? But at some point, you get beyond what you can drive yourself. And the only way for a product to sell millions or tens of millions of units is it has to be driven by word of mouth. People have to be talking about it. And I like Seth Godin's definition of that, which is you need to create something remarkable, which is to say that it is worthy of remark, right? It's like worthy of people talking about it. And people only talk about stuff that they genuinely love, that they genuinely find useful, that is actually making a difference in their lives. And so in a sense, the book selling 10 million plus copies, for me, I feel like that's the best possible evidence that I did it right, which is I must have created something that did help people, because otherwise they wouldn't be talking about it. And it would never get to that level. So ultimately, it all comes back to the same thing, which is you have to create something remarkable. Like there's no way to do it without like really nailing the product. But we all know plenty of great products that don't reach that level. And I think that comes back to the positioning and the launch and the other factors that I mentioned. So you kind of need the confluence of all of those. You need a really well-positioned product. You need to execute a great launch of it. But ultimately, it will only run as far as the word of mouth will take it. And so you have to have a fantastic product behind it, because otherwise people won't talk about it.
You mentioned a couple of things that really helped at launch. We have a number of prospective authors or first-time authors, recurring authors listening. What do you think in retrospect really helped the launch of Atomic Habits?
So we did not so first of all, it's a 2-person job. So I have 1 employee. I run a 2-person operation. So Lindsay was a crucial part of the launch. I actually, I was solo for the first like 5 or 7 years of my career. And then when I signed the book deal for Atomic Habits, I used some of the money from the advance to hire her. So without getting a like mainstream publishing deal, I wouldn't have had the money to hire her up front. I spent all this time writing the book, and I wanted to make sure that we gave it the best possible chance to reach as many people as possible. We began planning the launch of Atomic Habits 15 months before it came out. So I think that's the first thing, is a long timeline. I will often hear from authors who are like, hey, I have a book coming out in 2 months. What should I do? And I'm not saying you can't use those 2 months effectively, but you're 13 months behind where I was when we were starting. And so it's a very long process to execute all this stuff well. So that's the first thing, is realizing I don't think it has to be 15 months, but I do think if you're going to be really serious about it, probably 9 months to a year is how much time you're going to need to be thinking about this carefully. I did not really do anything that people usually have not already heard of, but we did do it at a larger scale than most other authors do. So obviously I have my own audience, and your email list is that's the most important thing. So as I said, I spent 5 years building that. So that was really crucial. When the book came out, I think when I signed the book deal, my email list was around 220, maybe 225,000 people. When the book came out, it was closer to 450. So that was 3 years later. So I had a large email list to launch to. So that helped. The second thing was podcasts. I had 75 podcast interviews recorded and ready to be released before the book came out. And then I did 25 more the month the book came out. So by the time the book had been out for 1 month, there were 100 podcast interviews that had been released within the same 4 weeks. And for all of those, this is part of the unsexy manual labor kind of grunt work part of it. Went to iTunes, looked at the, top lists for all the different categories. And then we identified only shows that were interview shows. So they're already interviewing people. So we don't have to convince them to do something different than normal. We only looked at shows that were a good fit for the topic of the book, and then came up with a list of 300. And then I wrote individual emails to the hosts of all those 300 shows, and we saved them all up. I wrote all the drafts. And then like 6 months before the book came out, we sent all the drafts out to everybody and, to ask if they would have me on the show. Spent a couple months getting those all scheduled. And then I spent like the 3 months before the book coming out recording all those. After they were each recorded, I would ask each host, hey, can we release this on this week when the book comes out? And not everybody would do it exactly that week, but most people would do it right around there. And so, yeah, you got to ask 300 to get on 100, and you got to spend, multiple months writing all those emails and getting, everything put together. So it was a very like laborious or unsexy part of the process, but that's how it happened. So we did the email list. I did the podcast push. Now I've done over 200 podcast interviews. It just, a lot now more of them come in like this one and so on. And then I got a little bit lucky about a year before the book came out. I had written an article on my website, a blog post that had been up for a while, a couple of years, and it was fine. It did fine, but it wasn't anything amazing. And a journalist at the New York Times wrote an article, and they just linked to my blog post in that piece. It was just one sentence. It wasn't like any big thing. They linked to it, and a producer from CBS This Morning was reading that article in the New York Times and clicked through to my website and found the original blog post. And they sent me an email. This was like a year before Atomic Habits came out. And they were like, hey, do you want to come on the show and talk about, this productivity article that you'd written? And so I was like, sure. So I took that really seriously. I scripted out, they told me they were going to give me 3 minutes. And I scripted out like 6 minutes worth of material. And I sent that to the producer ahead of time. I said, hey, here's what I think we could talk about. They liked it. We ended up doing 4.5 minutes. And I tried to do a really good job with that segment. And as soon as it ended, I went up to Gayle King and I said, I have a book coming out in 10 months. I would love to come back and do another short segment like this about the book. And she said, we'd love to have you. Just make sure that we're your first stop. Like, don't do a TV interview anywhere else before you do this one. And I was like, deal. So I got her email, and that day I got back and emailed her and got the producers lined up and got like everybody got the publisher looped in and like made sure that we got that scheduled. And on launch day, I was in New York. I did the CBS This Morning segment in the morning. They put it on their YouTube channel like 2 hours later. We took the clip from YouTube and put it in my email newsletter and sent that out to my audience. And that was the like announcement email that the book is out. And I don't know how many books the actual TV segment sold. I've tried to estimate it. It's probably between, on the low end, 1,000, on the high end, 10,000, but it's probably somewhere in that range. But what it really did that benefited things was it made it feel like a thing. It made it feel real. It wasn't just a guy launching his book. It was like, no, this is an event now. And so I use that clip on social media and so on. And all of these things that I'm mentioning, the emails to my audience, the TV segment, the podcast interviews, there were some other things we did too, but those are the main ones. All of this stuff, all this marketing energy is coming into the same compressed window. So it's all happening at the same time, right? And so this is kind of my approach. I feel like you need to have a concentrated strike for the launch. So all of that energy is in the same tight window of a few days. And what happens is that it seems much bigger than it actually is. It's like for a week or two, it's like all anybody's talking about. And I had people on, Twitter being like, man, I can't get away from this guy. And it's kind of like that's sort of the point, is to try to be everywhere for a bit. And you can imagine all that same marketing energy, but if it's spread out over the course of like a year and something happens like every week or two, it doesn't seem like much. It's just kind of in the background. It's just noise the whole time. Right. But if it's all in the same tight window, then it feels big. So those are the majority of the things we did. There are some other things too that, I would say were smaller stuff, but all of that energy is trying to get packed into the same month. And collectively, that kind of helped the book propel the book out and give it a good, push out of the gate.
Well, we will talk about habits at some point, I promise. And but you've given a million interviews on that, and there's a whole book on that. I always love the backstory. Do you still just have one person, you and is it Lindsay?
Yeah,
that's your team.
It's just us. Wow. I had someone join me for a few months for like podcast stuff. I was thinking about launching a show. Now that for various reasons that's on the back burner. But yeah, we're just a team of me and one other person. That's how I prefer it. I have no intentions of hiring a larger staff. I just want to keep it as lean as possible.
Why is that?
I think I'm a bad manager. I don't think I'm good at managing people. I don't enjoy it. So there are plenty of other authors who have really big teams. You know, some of them have hundreds of people if they want to run like a whole consultancy or have like a big coaching program, or, you know, like it depends on what kind of business you want to run. And there are probably plenty of arguments for doing that if you want to make the maximum amount of money or make the maximum amount of revenue. But I have no desire to make more money and have my daily life be worse. So I would rather have my first question is always, how do I want to spend my days? And I start there. And then I want to do whatever is cool and creative and fun and interesting and build a really successful business within the confines of how I want to be living my days. And that has to be the boundary for me. So I'm not interested in having like a huge team or growing to, you know, be as large as possible.
You must be very good at saying no, because, you know, on one hand, you describe what I would call the outbound. You know, you're an author, a first-time author. You send 300 cold call emails. You're working the system, trying to get noticed. And now, you know, with the position you have in the world, it's the opposite. You must have just a ton of inbound that you know, speaking requests, media requests, interview requests. Can you do this? You probably have a lot of pressure to publish the next book from publishers and deals coming in. Can you talk about your discipline for staying lean, staying focused, and saying no?
Yeah, I'm probably wrong person to ask this question to. I feel like I'm always 3 months behind what I should be saying no to. I'm like always on the hook for more than I should be. Early in my career, I felt like I was trying to say yes to everything. I was trying to capitalize on opportunities. And I still feel like that's probably the right approach. You know, like nobody knew who I was. I didn't have any resources. I didn't have an audience. I didn't have any, you know, so it was just like, you have to try to be this force of nature and make the opportunity for yourself or capitalize on whatever, you know, potential advantages you can find, and make the most of the opportunity. But then this weird thing happens where, you know, the book blows up. And as you said, now there's a ton of inbound. And it was kind of like, I wouldn't say it was overnight, but it was over a period of about 3 months. The book came out in October. And then the period from like December to February, that was the period where it was like, oh, I suddenly need to like completely change my approach. Like I can't say yes to everything now.
And this is 2018, right? The book came out?
Yeah, it came out in October of 2018. So from December 2018 to February 2019, that was when things like started to click a little bit. And I was like, oh, I need to start saying no to like the vast majority of things that are coming in. And it just got progressively harder over the next year or two. I am better about it now. And some of it is like, we have processes in place that help. Some of it, honestly, like some of it stinks a little bit. Like when I first started building the audience, the first 10,000 people that signed up to my email list, I sent each person, I would just go through, you know, it was just a couple, I don't know how many it was today, 30 a day, 40 a day, whatever it was. But, you know, I would go through and I would send each person an email and just say, hey, thanks so much for signing up. Like, I'm really excited to have you here. It's great to have you as part of the audience. And you can do that for the first 10,000. But after a while, like you can't do that anymore. And then it got to the point where I was like, all right, I won't do outbound reach to people who come in, but whenever someone emails me, I'll respond to them. So I did that for a while. And then you get over 100,000 and then like that becomes hard. And then now, you know, now the email list is 2 million people and there's just, you know, I had to give it up. I can't do the email inbox anymore. And that's a little bit of a bummer. You know, it's like I feel, I don't know if I feel a responsibility to do it, but I do feel like, yeah, these people care enough to like have read or send a message in. Like, I don't know, it'd be nice to be able to respond to them. So it's just hard once the volume gets large. So some of that stuff is different. Like I just, you know, I don't do email anymore, basically. Vast majority of podcast requests get declined. Used to be, I would do whatever one, you know, reached out, but now I only do like 15 or 20 a year. And I just, you know, anybody who reaches out, we say, listen, you got to go on the wait list and I'll do one block of interviews a year. And if you make the cut, like we'll let you know. But you know, it's going to be a few months before we get this scheduled. And, so again, same thing there. It's like, be great if we could do them all, but just time is limited. Speaking requests, same thing. Speaking is a really weird thing, where it's like 99% of the time it's a no. But occasionally you can do one. In a sense, what I'm getting at here is that focus is really the art of knowing what to ignore. We think about it as being what you commit to, but it's just as much what you avoid. And if you become good at ignoring the lower value, might be the wrong word, but lower leverage tasks, then you have time and space for the higher leverage things. And the tricky part is it's a moving target, like even now, like things that I would have previously been excited about, there's stuff that happens every week now that would have been the coolest thing that happened to me for like the whole year, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And I can't do it. And so it's a very weird place to be in. I definitely, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm complaining because it's like the best possible outcome that you could want. I remember hearing one time that Charlie Munger said like, a lot of time people make it to their 90s and then all they do is complain about old age and how much their body hurts and how difficult life is. And he's like, it doesn't make any sense to complain about the best possible outcome. Like the alternative is worse. And so same story here, like it's best possible outcome. So I'm very grateful for it, but it does come with like a new set of challenges and you need to kind of alter your mindset to manage it and handle it.
I appreciate you talking about it because there are thousands of people listening to this who ended up leading something bigger than they expected. And they're having to make the same decisions. Number one, no, you're not alone. Number two, I'm familiar with a lot of what you just shared. And you say, I will always answer every email. I will always say yes. And then you eventually, the inbound gets to the point where you just can't do it. So you don't do a lot of interviews. What is one question you wish people would ask you that nobody ever asks you?
Honestly, a lot of what we already talked about. No, most people don't ask about how the book happened or how, like, what's going on behind the scenes to get it launched. And it's sort of interesting because a lot of the core message of Atomic Habits is that the results of success are highly visible and widely discussed, but the process of success is invisible and often hidden from view. And so we only talk about things usually if it's a result. Like you're never going to hear somebody say, here's a news story about man eating chicken and salad for lunch. It's like, no, it's only a story once man loses 100 pounds. And then we have something to talk about. Or like, you'll never see people on social media be like, James writes 500 words today. It's like, it's only a story once Atomic Habits is a bestseller. And so I feel like a lot of what I'm trying to encourage in the book is a recommitment or a refocusing on the process and on the habits and on the system that you're running day in and day out, and not as much of an emphasis on the results. And ironically, that process for creating the book almost never gets talked about. What people always talk about is book sold over 10 million copies, is bestseller, it's been on the New York Times list for X number of weeks, and not what was the process behind that? How did it actually come to be? So I'm glad that we were able to kind of flip that on its head and talk a little bit about the behind the scenes piece.
Well, that makes me really happy too. So let's fast forward then. So it was about a decade-ish ago that you started blogging on a regular basis.
November 12th, 2012 was the first article I wrote on jamesclear.com. And then I did every Monday and Thursday for the next 3 years after that.
Very similar. September 2012 for me. And in those days, it was easy to blow up. I mean, you just had to write and people found you. Do you know Brian Clark? Do you know him? Copy blogger?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I followed Brian for years and I just met him recently and we struck up a friendship. But
he was super early. They probably, I don't know when Copy Blogger started. It's probably like 2006 or something. They were very
0506. Yep. And he kind of helped create the rules of like what people like you and I did. And I've had him on the show, but he will tell you what got you there won't work in the future. So when you're thinking about the future now, is there a sequel or another book in the works, or like what's on your current agenda? And then how are you approaching things strategically differently now than you did a decade ago when it comes to being noticed, nurturing an email list? Because a lot of the rules got thrown out the window in the last 5 years. So that's kind of 2 or 3 questions, but feel free to take it where you want.
Sure. I generally agree with Brian that, for sure what got you here won't get you there. And that I don't even think that's unique to our corner of entrepreneurship or our part of the internet. That's just kind of how it is in life in general. Like there's this sort of overarching principle of evolve or die. Like you have to be willing to update and adjust. And the willingness to continue growing or to continue learning is perhaps like the most robust thing that you can have, because that's just going to be a requirement. I don't even think it needs to be over a 10-year time span or a 5-year time span. I would say, looking back over the last decade, about every 2 years or so, where my website gets traffic from is very different from where it was 2 years prior. And so there's kind of these like shifts in how things happen. It's very hard to predict where it's going to go. So I don't think anybody really knows. It's also very hard to notice where things are going if you're not in the mix, if you're not engaged. And early on, like I said, I had a lot of time. I didn't have kids yet. I wasn't married yet, that sort of thing. So that was an advantage, and I could like spend more time, being in the mix, being on Quora or Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and just kind of seeing how things worked or looking at other people's brands. That's what I would be doing if I was up and coming right now, is the same thing I did then, which is try to identify the people who have the kind of lifestyle that you want to have, and then start deconstructing what they do and how their brand works. How frequently do they post videos? How long are they, like, let's say that you want to be a YouTuber. How many videos do they post? How long are they? What do they do for their thumbnails? Are there any patterns in how the videos are created? Is there a structure in what the typical video looks like? Is there like an intro period for a minute and then they get into the main content? How do they hook people in? Is there any pattern in how they write the titles of the videos and so on? And that's just an example for YouTubers, right? You can do that for, any possible thing that you're interested in. But I think there are a couple different levels of, or a couple different hurdles you have to clear. The first, maybe the most important, enormous hurdle is, what are you genuinely interested in? If you're not genuinely interested in it, if you are not truly curious and excited about it, it's going to be very hard to win this race in the long run, because it's going to start to feel like a hassle. It's going to start to feel like a chore for you to show up each day and do the work. But if you're genuinely interested in it, there will be like endless opportunities for you to improve. There are some YouTubers out there who, all those things I just mentioned, they like find that very interesting. They think it's very curious. Like how long is the ideal video, and what is the ideal thumbnail, and how do you structure the perfect title? They care about all that stuff. And because they're interested in it, it's not a hassle for them to try to do that with their own brand. And I think a lot of the time, we just sort of mimic or imitate what we think we should be doing, or what it feels like society is nudging you toward, or what your parents want you to do, or your peers are encouraging you to do. And so you kind of end up with this brand or this business that is mimicked off of others, when in fact, the first thing you need to ask is it a right fit for me and my interests? And then once it's a fit for your interest, sure, go ahead and imitate the other people who are succeeding within that little sphere of what you want to do. But I think you need to start with what is your genuine curiosity. After that, then I really like Steve Jobs had this famous quote where he was talking about, I think it was the iPad, not using Flash. And Flash was a big thing on the webs, on the internet at that time. And people were like, how come you're not using this technology or whatever? And he said something to the effect of, we like to invest in products that are in their spring and summer, and technologies that are in their spring and summer. And we feel like Flash is in its fall and headed toward winter. And so, we don't want to do that. And I would say that's like a good way to think about, where am I going to get traffic from? Where are the areas of the internet that are kind of in their spring and summer right now? And are there things that maybe are those places that you can hang out and utilize? The other element there is, not every platform is a good fit for the certain types of content, So I'm a writer, and most of my ideas are obviously text-based. So mostly I'm hanging out on blogs and email lists and Twitter. I do have an Instagram account that, surprisingly, despite the fact that I never share pictures of myself or any kind of image, like does fairly well, because I just post images of quotes. So that was able to work, but I don't have a YouTube channel. and I don't have a TikTok account. And, like there are other mediums and formats that aren't as good of a fit for my business, but they'd be a great fit for other businesses. There are some businesses that's their whole thing is YouTube and TikTok. And so you just need to try to figure out what is the best fit for you and your brand. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot that we could discuss with this, but the last thing that I'll say on it is 10 years ago when we were getting started, I feel like the internet was maybe a little bit more of a hub and spoke model where you could have your website at the center and then you could just repurpose content across a bunch of different things and all point back to the website or the blog. Now, I don't feel like people use the internet in the same way. It's kind of more siloed in the sense that you have people who are like podcast people and Instagram people. And then you've got other folks who are like Twitter people and YouTube people. And they don't really use podcasts and Instagram. And so the hard part about that is you have it's more platform centric now. And if you want to stand out on any of these platforms, like if you want to stand out on Instagram, you need to be in the top 1% of Instagrammers. If you want to stand out on YouTube, you need to be in the top 1% of YouTubers. And so I don't think it makes sense to spread yourself thin. It comes back to this concept we talked about a minute ago, focus, and pick a few key things that feel like they're in their spring and summer and that are a good fit for your brand and your business, and then try to master those. And I feel like it's better to have a big audience in one platform than to have like a small audience in 10.
Yeah, I love that definition of focus is the art of what to ignore. That's a great phrasing of it. So 2 last questions for you, James. One quick answer. The other might take a few more minutes. Is there another book in the works or in your mind, or what's up with that?
I am technically under contract to write a second book. I have not been writing as much as I would like, but yes, it's in the works. I wrote my book on habits. Like everything I know about habits is in Atomic Habits. So I don't have like a second book on that topic, but I do think I would like a book that plays nicely with it. And there are some questions you could have after finishing Atomic Habits, like, okay, I know how to build habits now, but which habits do I focus on? Or like, where do I direct my attention and energy? Kind of similar to the focus point. How do I focus on the highest leverage things, the best things? So I'm sort of circling a bunch of topics like that right now, and it's slowly taking shape.
Now, okay, so my last question is, because we could talk about habits. This will be the first podcast of the new year on my show. But again, all that information is out there on many interviews in an incredible book on your blog. But toward the end of Atomic Habits, you talk about your values, that your values, you try to make sure your habits are driven from your values. And at the end of every year, you review your values and you think about, okay, how do I want to shift that? I love the idea of value-driven habits. I don't know whether you'd use that language or whether you'd nuance it in any way, but can you tell us about that process and how it informs your habits for a new year?
Well, the big picture is that I think your habits matter, not just because of the results that they get you, but because of the identity that they reinforce. So your habits are how you embody a particular identity. For example, when you make your bed in the morning, you embody the identity of someone who's clean and organized. Or if you study biology for 20 minutes on Tuesday night, you embody the identity of someone who's studious. And so we often talk about habits as mattering because they can help you be more productive or lose weight or make more money or whatever. And that's true that habits can help you get those results. But the real reason that habits matter is that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And so, no, doing one push-up does not transform your body, but it does cast a vote for, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And no, writing one sentence does not finish the novel, but it does cast a vote for, I'm a writer. And individually, those are small things, but collectively, they start to add up. You repeat these habits each day, and you build up this body of evidence. You keep casting votes on the pile. And pretty soon, you sort of reshape the story you have about who you are and what you're doing. And this is a little bit different than what you often hear. Like you'll often hear people say something like, fake it till you make it. Now, I don't necessarily have anything wrong with fake it till you make it. It's asking you to believe something positive about yourself, but it's asking you to believe something positive without having evidence for it. And we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call it delusion. Like your brain doesn't like this mismatch between what you say you are and what you're actually doing. And so my argument, my encouragement is to let the habit lead the way and to cast these votes for being that kind of person. And once you get to that place where your habits are reinforcing your desired identity, once you get to that place where you feel like, yeah, this is actually part of who I am, it becomes easier to follow through on the behavior. Like someone who views themselves as I am a runner, they don't have to motivate themselves to go for a run in the same way that somebody who's just getting started does. It's kind of like, no, this is just part of what I do. Like, this is part of my normal day. And so I think the elements of your story that you take pride in are often the ones that are at least a little bit easier to stick to the habits around. Like if you take pride in the size of your biceps, you never skip arm day at the gym. Or like if you take pride in how your hair looks, you have this long hair care routine, you do it every day. And so what we're really trying to get to is a place where your habits reinforce your desired identity. Now, I think the first question you can ask, if you're just like at this planning process for the new year and so on, is a lot of the time people pick New Year's resolutions or they pick their goals for the year and they think about, what do I want to achieve? And I feel like the question to ask is, who do I want to become? Who is the type of person I wish to be?
Identity-based habits. Right?
And then what habits reinforce that desired identity? Now, the tricky part, and this is where I come back to your actual question, is that over time, things can drift. Your habits don't always continue to reinforce that identity that you want, or maybe you fall off the wagon a little bit and you got started really strong, but now you're not doing it as consistently. And so at the end of each year, I have this annual review process where I write out what my core values are, which all of this, of course, is connected to the identity I want to have, the type of person I want to be. And then I start to go through the habits that I've followed for the year. How many workouts did I follow or complete? How many articles did I write? How many places did I visit? How many nights did I have at home with family? How many nights were on the road? And then you start to look through and you see, okay, I said these things are my core values. Do my habits match up with that? And I think that's another really crucial question to ask yourself, which is, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? Because if they can't, and there's some gap between the core values that you say you have, or the type of person that you wish to be, and the habits that you're following each day, something needs to change, And so this is one of another like core ideas from the book, which is you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Well, in this case, the goal, the objective is, who do I want to be? What values do I have? What's the type of person I want to create? But the system is the collection of daily habits that you follow. And if there's ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. Like almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think the core idea is that we want to start with, who do I wish to become, and build habits to reinforce that identity. And then it's good to have checkpoints along the way, periods of reflection and review, whether that's annual or some other timeline that works for you, so that you can just check in and have these like milestones and make sure, is my behavior actually reinforcing the values that I hope it is? And I have found that to be a more useful long-term way to think about building and shaping your habits and behavior.
James, this has been so incredibly enlightening. Is there a final word for leaders or anything else you want to say before we direct people to where you're showing up online these days?
Last thing I'll just say, we've talked a lot about like strategy of habits and kind of in some of my personal backstory and whatnot. The other crucial part of this is execution. And, of course, Atomic Habits is there as a reference guide, and there are many ways to execute these ideas. But if I was just going to offer one to close,
please,
I would encourage people to utilize what I call the 2-minute rule, which is very simple. It just says, take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. Now, sometimes people resist that a little bit because they're like, okay, I know the real goal isn't just to take the mat out. I know I actually want to do the workout. But I had this reader, his name's Mitch. I mentioned him in Atomic Habits. He lost over 100 pounds. He's kept it off for more than a decade. And when he first started going to the gym, he had this strange little rule for himself where he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds ridiculous. It sounds silly. You're like, clearly this is not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you take a step back, what you realize is he was mastering the art of showing up. He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And that's a deep truth about habits, this kind of core idea, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved. It has to become the standard in your life before you can scale it up and turn it into something more. You need to standardize before you optimize. And I don't know why we do it, but we get really all or nothing about our habits. We're so focused on finding the best business idea or the perfect sales strategy, the ideal workout plan. We're so focused on optimizing that we don't give ourselves permission to show up, even if it's just in a small way. So I think my parting advice would be start by asking yourself, what am I optimizing for? Who's the type of person I wish to become? What's the identity I want to reinforce? And then the next step is, how can I scale that down? How can I master the art of showing up? How can I start executing day in and day out and reinforce that desired identity? And then in the long run, there are plenty of opportunities to improve once you've mastered the art of showing up.
James, thank you so much. Where are you showing up online these days? Obviously at your blog. I love your newsletter. So tell people who aren't connected where they can connect.
Thank you. Pleasure to talk to you. JamesClear.com is the easiest place to go. You can just click on newsletter if you want to sign up for that. It's called 321. It goes out to over 2 million people each week. It's just 3 short ideas from me, 2 quotes from other people, and then 1 question to think about for the week. And of course, Atomic Habits. And so if you want to check that out, just go to atomichabits.com.
Great. James, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying yes to this, and it has been a treat.
Wonderful. Thank you.
There's a new movement happening in the country to reclaim the promise of Jesus' unconditional love and grace, and to see his church rise above the culture war. He Gets Us hopes to give it a voice. The biggest faith campaign in history, He Gets Us invites a rapidly growing audience, from spiritual explorers to like-minded Christians, to reconsider the radical life of Jesus. Whether people believe Jesus was God or just a man, they're invited to consider his example for themselves.